From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, welcome to this special program as Brazil decides upon its political future. I'm Sweeney Gray.
And I'm Ian Bruce.
For the next hour, we'll be following and discussing this vital election in Brazil, one that the experts have described as the most uncertain and important in years. We're going to have a number of guests from Brazil. First, Eduardo Silva of the Workers' Party joins us from Sao Paulo. And we're also being joined by...
But at the same time, there was even a surprising amount of mobilization of young people who believe that we need another kind of alternative here. And many of them were Lula supporters who then, took Haddad on as their candidate. There were others who believe that Ciro Gomes would be a good option. Others who believe that Marina da Silva represents something very different, somebody really from the outside, somebody with a platform that includes environmental issues. So yes, it's been quite hard here, but again, amongst young people, I saw a surge of something that actually I had never seen before. And I had never seen so many young people, young women, young men, and of course, supporters of all ages going onto the streets to demand respect for women's rights, demanding gender inequality, demanding respect for diversity, demanding an end to racism, demanding public education, health, and so on and so forth. So,
Miriam, I'd like to pick up on something you're talking about there, because we've been talking a lot about this quite alarming rise in support for the far-right candidate Bolsonaro. But now you're talking about a very different thing. And it does seem to be this extraordinarily polarized situation, which was exhibited, most dramatically by those huge demonstrations just 1 week ago. I think, something in the region of 2 million people, led by women, not all women, of course, but led by women, against the rise of that. How do you see this polarization playing out?
Well, it's very hard to say. It's very hard to say. I do know that if we are to, it's going to require a lot of effort on the part of everybody who believes in a more just and equal society over the course of the next couple of weeks. But perhaps it is possible, because something that has been widely commented on in the amongst people who consider themselves center and left of center is that there is a mass of Brazilian people out there, working class people, people who live in rural environments, people who belong to more marginalized populations, and just, even lower middle class people who are not very well informed about what's going on. And I myself have had experiences in which I go onto the street and talk to people, and they've just been sort of pushed along by perhaps what somebody in the church says, or WhatsApp messages that they get, that they've received. And when you sit down and explain to people and you say, look, this candidate has a very anti-woman agenda. This is a candidate who has made who's made public speech that actually legitimizes rape. This is somebody who just disseminates hatred, who works against a long, hard struggle to have gay and lesbian rights recognized in this country. And when we get into when we can show people also what kind of a voting record he's had on issues that affect working people's rights, then, we've all had success. So just, it's a matter of going out there and showing and creating over the next 2 weeks spaces in which a lot of face-to-face talk can go on in environments that are calm and more reasonable, and where emotions are just a sort of a more peaceful and a calm environment. Because
let me interrupt you. Miriam, let me interrupt you a second because we have a really important update there on the screen. So I just want to draw our viewers' attention to it. We have 80-something% of the votes in. So right now, Jair Bolsonaro is at 47.6%, which means we're still going to a runoff, and Fernando Haddad is at 27.2%. So that is with over 80% of the votes counted so far, 86% of the votes counted so far. So Miriam, you were talking about the activism. I want to go back to that because we never explicitly spoke about the LA Now protests in Brazil against Bolsonaro's misogynistic comments. We have to talk about his anti-LGBT comments, his racist comments. They have served to, I guess, influence young people to get into politics, to be active, to be on the road, which is something that we've seen in other places where we have the rise of the right. We see civil activism rising. How do you expect this to progress in the next 2 weeks for the runoff? Because right now we seem to be heading into a runoff in Brazil.
Yes. Well, I expect it to move full steam ahead. I think that a lot of people on the left have realized that there's a lot to be won on this grassroots level. Going and talking to people and explaining to people who I said don't have a high level of cultural capital. So there are people who, but of course, they're smart enough to recognize that they have interest and that they have rights, and that and what is at stake. So, when I do think that what we're seeing is that it's very close, that there is a lot in stake, and it could go one way or it could go the other way. But there's one other thing that I should say, and that is, one way or another, I am certainly hoping that the left and the center left are able to put enough work into this, roll up their sleeves, get out there in the community, talk to people, because it is very sad to see so many working people. The elites, people who have their class interests at stake, that's one thing. But to see ordinary working people, women, LGBT, Black members of the Black community, well, for the most part, I do believe that the so-called minorities have not voted for Bolsonaro. But to see that happens even to any small degree is a very anguishing and a very frustrating thing, But I think that there is a chance for this turnaround, and that too much has been left to WhatsApp, to major media corporations. So, there's. But again, there is one other point that I wanted to make, and that is that unfortunately a lot of damage has been done. So, even if, as I hope, the left candidate, the opposition Haddad in this case, if he does win, we are still going to need to get out there into the streets. The people who support Bolsonaro, who are already, we've seen it again and again, they're ready to use violence. They will use violence. They've been using intimidation at institutional levels.
I've been reporting on that for the day. Thank you so much, Miriam Adelman. We really appreciate your thoughts on that. But I do like that you tried to end it on a bit of optimism. But we have more guests and more discussion. But first, we have to take a really short break, and we'll be back in a few minutes.
Quilombola em Eldorado Paulista. Olha, o afrodescendente mais leve lá pesava 7 arrobas. Não fazem nada. Eu empregaria com meu salário. Sem problema. Agora tem muita mulher que é competente. Eu acho que essa é igual. Olha, jamais eu tô pra você que você não merece.
Olha, eu espero que...
Welcome back. Thank you. Welcome to Brazil Decides, our Tell Us Your English's coverage of one of the most interesting and fascinating elections in Brazilian history. So we've been having a lot of conversation throughout the show so far, but I think it's really important for us to focus on the candidates. So let's turn to the Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad, who's been able to step into the shoes of the former president Lula da Silva. Here's a report about him from one of our correspondents in Brazil.
After the triumph of Dilma Rousseff in the last presidential election 4 years ago, the Workers' Party was attacked by the opposition. Media and elites led to the impeachment, privatizations, austerity policies, and the imprisonment of former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. The Workers' Party found in Fernando Haddad an option to replace Lula.
Lula was a good president. I vote for him. I will vote for Haddad and for the entire Workers' Party.
I will vote for Haddad because Lula was the only president who worked hard for the northern region.
I will vote for Haddad. He is ahead on the polls and we're going to win.
We are waiting for the general election. Haddad will win. He will receive the presidential sash and everything will go back to normal.
Fernando Haddad is an academic, former mayor of Sao Paulo, and former minister of education. He helped found 18 universities, 173 school campuses, and 360 federal institutes. The Workers' Party also established an education policy to give more opportunities for Black, Pardos, and indigenous people. Among his proposals are the abolition of the labor reform, a reform on social investment and privatization policies imposed by President Michel Temer. Also, a reform of the state system to establish a truth commission to investigate crimes of the dictatorship and the development of a basic food income. If Haddad wins the presidency, he will continue using Petrobras as the main axis of Brazil's economy. This was the same economic strategy used by the previous administrations of the Workers' Party.
Petrobras grew with the price policies that we used to apply. We have taken into account external prices, but in relation to their impact on product costs. However, Michel Temer has transformed Petrobras into a speculative company.
But Haddad needs to convince Lula supporters to vote for him. Lula was leading the polls until his candidacy was revoked by the Electoral Court. However, the new government program developed by Haddad has Lula's support.
It is more advanced than other economic programs presented by the Workers' Party in previous presidential elections. It contains very important structural reforms like the tax reforms and the banking reform. The tax reforms will make those who make more money pay more and those who make less pay less. Brazil has a very aggressive tax structure. More than 60% of taxes are paid by the poorer sectors of the country.
The Workers' Party seeks to win their first presidential election since the impeachment of Dilma Rousseff. The polls anticipate an eventual second round between the extreme right and the Workers' Party.
So that was a look at the Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad and what he represents. Now I just want to give you a quick update on the results. With 86% of the votes counted, Jair Bolsonaro 47.6. Now that's a couple of points down from what we saw right at the beginning of the official results, when it was about 50%. So he's come down a little bit.
40 years.
Thank you, sorry. And Haddad on 27, just over 27%. So still heading for a runoff as far as we can see, but much higher vote for Bolsonaro than any of us thought earlier in the day or in the last few days. Let's take a look at what Jair Bolsonaro represents.
He is a 62-year-old former captain in the army who defends the military dictatorship and considers torture legitimate. He has become notorious for his sexist and homophobic remarks, and he has presented himself as a messiah to save the Brazilian people. Bolsonaro has served 7 terms as a member of the lower house of the Brazilian Congress. His political platform includes a strong security agenda. It includes lowering the age of criminal responsibility to 16 and spending more on the police and intelligence services. He's also in favor of privatizing public companies.
So, that's some of the points of his agenda. But just let's be a bit more specific about some of the more outrageous remarks that Jair Bolsonaro has made. You know, he talks about he's made extremely explicit anti-LGBT homophobic remarks. He's also explicitly defended the dictatorship, the military dictatorship. He was, of course, a captain in the army, and he's often referred to how things were better under the military dictatorship that ended in 1985. And he's also, don't think we have the right graphic up here, but he's also explicitly defended the use of torture and suggested that you never got any results by voting. A very strange position to have for somebody who's running in a presidential election, of course. So, he's presented this image of someone who's anti-establishment and anti the system which people are indeed, disillusioned with because of the corruption, because the economy hasn't been going well, and so on and so forth. But his actual core economic policies are straight down the line conventional neoliberal.
Really interesting. We did have some quotes up there. I think you didn't get a chance to talk about his that rape comment, which I find very shocking. But then, of course, I think a lot of Brazilian women did as well, because we had the LA Now protests. So that was our profile of Jair Bolsonaro, who is the far-right candidate for Brazil.
I mean, there clearly are here, two so different projects for Brazil. And it's difficult to know. I mean, we were talking about that polarization before, which is an expression in the streets and in the ballot boxes of the way Brazil has become so divided.
So let me interrupt you. Okay, so these numbers have changed very slightly. 88% of the votes counted.
Yes.
Jair Bolsonaro is at 47.3.
Yeah, very little difference there. Just a small climb up for Haddad.
Minute. Fernando Haddad at 27.5. But, because this is an election show, the numbers keep fluctuating.
And that's, as you say, 88%.
88% of the votes counted. So we're getting close to the end.
It is looking very difficult for Bolsonaro to get beyond that 50%. So it does look like we're going for a second round.
Yeah, and classic far-right examples in the results there, because the comments that he's saying, our correspondent Brian Mayer made some reference to the fact that he was seeing a lot of NRA comments, and for some viewers, NRA is the National Rifle Association in the United States, not even in Brazil, in the United States. But then that makes sense, because look who the United States has in power, and his commentary has been very far-right, very nationalistic, very emotional, very emotive stuff. He's also very sexist. He's also very racist. So there's a sort of, clearly politics right now, it's playing to the emotions. There's former Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. When I was doing the research for today's show, I keep remembering Basdeo Pandey saying politics has a morality of its own. And I think these sort of elections really makes that true, because there's no way those comments that Jair Bolsonaro is saying it's not rational. And why are people accepting it? Because for some reason, this sort of bad behavior is the norm in politics, or it's allowed. It's not allowed outside that sphere, but it's allowed in this one. So politics really does have a morality of its own.
So, I think we've got 2 more guests joining us now from Brazil. I think we've got Ana Shah, who is from the landless workers movement in Sao Paulo, and Vinicius Enrique Fontana, who's a freelance journalist who covers a lot of social movement issues, the indigenous movement, and so on. Thank you very much for joining us.
On screen.
Thank you.
Anna, maybe we could begin with you, because we have been talking about the Eli Now, the Not Him movement, and the way that there's this extraordinary polarization between that surge of protest against the far right that we saw just 1 week ago, and these results we're seeing now, where Bolsonaro seems to be doing better than expected. What do you make of this?
Yes, last week it was really a very, very big mobilization, mainly of women, but not just of women, about all the society. It was really powerful to see so many people, so many activists, so many militants, and not organized people also going in the streets and saying that we really don't want a president who, although it doesn't have any kind of really truly proposal for economics, for coming out of the crisis, but he's also a candidate who represents sexism, who represents homophobics, who represents a lot of behaviors against. We cannot say the minority of population, because it's the majority. Women and Black people and indigenous are the majority part of the Brazilian population. So it was really amazing to see all that mobilizations all around the country, not just in São Paulo, but in even the small cities. But of course, in the last weeks, because all the debate is now based on a very moral issues. Also, we had this counteract of the evangelic churches, of the right-wing candidates, just also using these moral arguments. And then we have seen also on internet a very big counterattack using all these arguments. And we truly believe that that kind of messages, and also a lot of offensive news were fake news, who were published on the social media, they had influenced a lot the people who went to vote on the candidate Bolsonaro. So for us it's a surprise. It's a very, very sad surprise because we really thought that saying no, it will be a changing on an alert to those people who still didn't know who to vote. But we realized that in the last weeks, the last week, this exactly 7 last days, so the evangelic churches and all those who were still not very decided who to support, but were from the right-wing parties, decided to make this last push on the campaign of Bolsonaro. And now we are very anxious today, but we truly believe and hope that it will be a second round, and that on the second round we will be able, the left, to make a major debate, to make a very truly debate on proposals, on concrete proposals to go behind the crisis, to make the country again to be developed. But on these last days, it was not a very fair propaganda of the projects. And what we have seen was the propagation of fake news, and a lot of people just have information from social media. So if they were still have not decided and received some kind of information from the family groups of WhatsApp or from the Facebook saying that Bolsonaro is the possibility to change Brazil against the corruption and against violence. So they somehow just received that information and accepted and went to vote and vote on him.
Anna Shaw, we want to keep you on set, but Ian Bruce, I understand that we have another guest.
Indeed, Vinicius Enrique Fontana. Thank you very much for joining us, Enrique. I wonder if you could broaden that out a little bit to other social movements. I know you've been doing a lot of work covering social movements. How do you think, whether it's not just the landless movement, the women's movement, the indigenous movement, the Afro-descendants movement, how will there be a mobilization, a real activity of social movements in these next 3 weeks to try and reverse this rise of the far right?
Yes, good evening. I believe that we'll have some movement, especially because the abstention was very high at this point. We had 20% of abstention on voting, so people who didn't go to vote. So the mobilization now for the Workers' Party and also for social movements, it's to convince people to go and vote. Because Bolsonaro is really, I believe that he's really fixed on his level. This 47, 48 will vary a little bit, but he will not be able to really convince more people to vote from this absent. And definitely the social movements.
Can I just interrupt you there a moment, Vinicius, because what you just said there reminds me of something I heard João Pedro Stedele say just a few days ago, when he said he didn't think there was a social basis for fascism in Brazil, and that he didn't think that Bolsonaro could go much beyond his 32%. And now we see him already on 47%. So isn't that a little bit of a risky prediction?
Yes, I agree. But at the same time, when we look at the candidates now that run on the first round, we'll see that Ciro Gomes, the one that got the third place, and most of his votes will go definitely to Fernando Haddad. That's the Workers' Party candidate. We still have a lot of uncertainty, but in a way, social movements will try to make it more, to create a better scenario for Fernando Haddad. And there's also another thing that Bolsonaro will now have to face the audience in the debates on television, on radio, because as he got stabbed, he stayed in the hospital and he wasn't allowed by his doctors to go in front of television and give and face Haddad face by face. So there's this expectation of him being confronted with Haddad directly, that he will not perform so well. So that's also a low point for him.
So, Vinicius, really quickly, this has been really interesting. What would what would Haddad have to do to ensure that he can convince the rest of the population that he is worth voting for? Because we have, the numbers have been close. He's had a pretty short campaign. And also we've been hearing that a lot of the voters in Brazil are pretty apathetic. And this is clearly, and people are clearly voting on emotion, not so much on evaluating facts. So, because we haven't actually spoken about the power of the evangelical church in Brazil, which is odd because, their candidate is Jair Bolsonaro, who's been saying a lot of non-Christian things. So what does Haddad have to do to tap into the emotion? Because apparently this is an election where emotions are most important.
Yes, definitely. Haddad will have to try to show people that he's the most democratic way to Brazil. He is the most democratic candidate, that the Workers' Party, it's really trying to build democracy in Brazil stronger and stronger. And he will have to look for alliances, especially in the states, because we have this very polarized situation where the northeast of Brazil votes pro the Workers' Party, and most of the other regions, but especially the south and São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, these areas are voting pro-Bolsonaro. But they also have a very high abstention rate. So maybe Fernando Haddad can try to convince people from these areas that he has a project of democracy, that Bolsonaro is a project that will take Brazil 30 years back to a non-democratic regime, or maybe formally democratic, but not democratic in the social way. So that's what I think is very important. I had to build alliances because, especially with the governors, because now it will be very difficult for him. We can see a little bit how the parliament is formed, and it's really, really conservative, especially the Senate. We still don't have a very clear situation about the lower chamber, because we have to count all the votes in all the states to have this very clear. So Haddad will really have to build these alliances with the states, especially in the Northeast, but also try to convince these people that are not going to vote, or that still are a bit undecided in the South, in Rio de Janeiro and São Paulo, especially.
Vinicia, I wonder if you could just bring Anna back in for a moment there, because Anna, I hope you're still hearing us. Vinicius there was talking about the kinds of alliances that Haddad will have to make to try and overcome and get past Bolsonaro in the second round. But what about the social movements, going back to them? Yourself, the MST, one of the most powerful, obviously one of the most powerful historic social movements in Brazil. What are you going to be doing as the MST in the next 3 weeks to try and turn this situation around?
Well, we really do believe, and that's not just from now on, it's since the beginning of this campaign, that we need to be on the streets. That's what we have been doing in the last months. In the beginning, believing that Lula was the best candidate and should be free and should be the candidate to be president. And if he was, he will certainly be winning these elections today. But in the case he could not be the candidate, we truly embrace Haddad as the candidate of the left, the only candidate who has the possibility to make the changes to stop what the coup d'etat that Brazil suffered this in 2 years ago just have provoked. So we are in the streets. We are not alone. We are together with a lot of other social movements. We are part of the Brazilian Popular Front, but we are also together with these feminist movements, with the indigenous movements. And we truly believe that now, although internet is still a very and the social media is still a camp of battle, that we need to be more present, and especially bringing a counter information, truly information that can show people that all these, a lot of offensive news who are being published about the Workers' Party, about Haddad, are fake news, are not true, but also showing them that the proposals that Bolsonaro has are truly against the workers and against the working class and against the poorest people. So internet is also a battle, a camp of battle that we need to be more present, but mainly from the part of social movements is on the street, is talking with people. We have been doing that the last days. We have been seen that a lot of people have just decided to vote on Bolsonaro, but don't have arguments to vote on him. When you ask him why will they vote on Bolsonaro, they don't know how to explain why they will vote. So we really believe that if we can just spend some time talking with some of those people, we can revert their vote. And also, of course, we truly believe that the left parties can be together with Haddad in the second round, and that we can really, on these 20 something days that we have until the runoff, that we can really make a debate about program, and to show that between these two candidates, the only one who has a really true program for Brazil, from development of Brazil, is Fernando Haddad.
Now, Anna, I'm going to ask you a question, but I need you to hold on for 2 seconds, because we have more new results that just came off the screen. So we have 93% of the votes in. I think I remember Jair Bolsonaro at 47, and Fernando at 23. I can't remember. We need to bring those back up. But I just wanted to mention it because that's 93% of the votes in. So we seem to be on track to a second round. Now, Anna, you were talking about the fact that y'all are on the ground. Okay, my results are Jair Bolsonaro is at 47% and Fernando Haddad at 28%. So we are definitely heading into a runoff. Anna of the Workers' Party, Anna Chow, I want to bring you back up because whoever wins the election after the second round is going to have a lot of work to do, which is going to be a very tall order because clearly Brazil is very fractured at the moment. What are you recommending, or what does the Workers' Party have as the solution to Brazil's problems at the moment? Because you'll have a lot of convincing to do to your populace. Anna?
Yes.
Because you're talking about social media and all of that. So I kind of wanted to talk about what, if your candidate wins, what is he going to have to do as he takes up office?
You're right when you say it will be a very difficult situation. Although if we have this situation that Haddad will win, we have seen now from the results that are already defined that there is a lot of right-wing candidates who win to be senated and to parliament. So that will bring a very difficult situation for Fernando Haddad to make a government and to make his proposals to be successful. But mainly, we need to focus on developing the potentialities of Brazilian economy, developing industry, but at the same time thinking that we should do that with redistribution of the resource. So we need to make a redistribution of the profits, and we need to find a way to stop the frozen of that the CUP just made. So these last 2 years, we have been a withdrawer of rights. We have been, in terms of budget, that the budgets for education, for health, for public services, mainly for the poor population, have been arrested. And so we need to reverse this situation. So at the same time, we need to promote the growing of the country, making the industry just develop again, but also look at the situation of the workers and really make the confront with the elites. And there's a lot of
Sorry, Anna. I wanted to bring Vinicius back into the conversation because Vinicius, thank you so much for that, because I think that's really important. And actually, I wanted to ask Vinicius to respond to actually the same question that I asked you. What would the candidate who wins would have to do? Now, Vinicius, you do a lot of work with social movements and with indigenous groups. So what are they telling you that they need from the government of Brazil?
Well, especially in terms of indigenous rights, in Brazil, the Brazilian state has historically a very low care about the indigenous population. And so what the president really needs is to listen to this population, to these minorities, that even before, even in Workers' Party governments, they were a bit kind of put on the second level to benefit some other areas, especially agribusiness. So what the president really needs to do is to listen to these people, it's to bring them into the political arena and to make their voices be heard to the other parts of the political sphere. So this is especially important for the president, whoever wins.
Vinicius, I wonder if I could ask you, because you're talking there about listening to the social movements, the indigenous peoples in Brazil. Anna was talking about the social movements being in the streets over the next 3 weeks, trying to convince people, trying to win back some of those votes from the sort of Bolsonaro camp. But you were also talking before about the need to build these alliances with some of the more centrist candidates in their base. And I'm just wondering how much of a tension there is between those two things, you know, between building the support in the streets and trying to get that pressure out there, listening to the social movements on the one hand, and on the other hand, trying to sort of pacify or build bridges with quite moderate candidates in the middle and their supporters. Isn't that going to be quite a tricky balancing act?
Definitely, and especially for Haddad, that will be very hard, because Bolsonaro is more in the extreme level, and he's also very focused on economy, and this, well, the market really likes Bolsonaro. So every time that he leads the polls, or for a broader difference, like the market start to get happy in a way. The dollar start to drop, and the shares in São Paulo trade bank, it starts to grow. So it's very difficult, actually, these dynamics. But to win the election, I think that the Workers' Party have to be a bit more flexible with the center, and at the same time has to attract people who are really interested in social movements. They tend to vote to Haddad, that's true, but the election is one part of the game. Let's see if we can call this a game, because it's really serious things. Because after the election, we'll have the presidency, and we will have to deal with things. And the impeachment now, it's really a reality in Brazil. We had 2 in about 30 years. So the president has to build these alliances very strong, not only for the election, but also to rule the country later. It's very hard, but and the Workers' Party is what they will do now is to go and meet Lula in the prison and try to see what Lula suggests, if goes more to the center or stick to the social movements and try to make points. So in the next week, we are likely to have a clear view about what the Workers' Party will do. On the other hand, I believe that Bolsonaro will still with his policy. And as you said, it's really important to make this point. Bolsonaro is not very strong in the streets, but he uses social media a lot. And saying this in terms of propaganda, he does it very well. He's very skillful with that. We know that there's a lot of fake news going on. And in Brazil, it's very popular WhatsApp. A lot of fake news circulates on WhatsApp. And it's very difficult to make WhatsApp accountable for what's going on there, because there are a lot of private conversations, so you cannot really see what's going on. It's very difficult to track down what's happening.
And Brazil has clearly gone digital, and in the digital wars, Bolsonaro seems to be winning. That's what you're saying?
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's it. I think so.
Okay.
But because, for instance, there was a research that Bolsonaro's voters 70% of Bolsonaro voters uses WhatsApp. And Fernando Haddad's only 59%, if I'm not mistaken, but it's less, it's definitely less. So they share a lot of content in media. He was very, let's say...
How's Bolsonaro in the streets, though? How is he in interpersonal relations with constituents?
All right. Yes, in this personal relationship, he's very, very... people are really passionate about him. I had the opportunity of talking with him once and meet him at the airport. And people were crying when they were looking at him. And he was very, in a way, I had to say he's charismatic. A lot of people want to interact with him, and he makes people smile, cry. He creates a lot of emotions. And as you can see, every time that...
Vinicius, I just want to interrupt you a second, because we had very shortly, we had a map on our screens. We're going to bring it back up, where we have converted Brazil into colors. Obviously, we have a little bit of blue for Ciro Gomes.
A tiny bit, just a
tiny bit. The Workers' Party, of course, is red.
right?
And green is Fernando. Bolsonaro. Yeah. So this is what Brazil looks like at the moment.
I think it's just worth pointing out here that there looks like a lot of red there. That's essentially the northeast, which, as we were talking about before, is where Lula's social programs had the biggest impact in terms of lifting people out of poverty, and the Amazonian region, the far north. But of course, they're also the most sparsely populated parts of Brazil. This southeast central part, down here in the south of Brazil, is pretty solid Bolsonaro territory, according to that map, and which is, of course, where the big cities are, where the main concentrations of the population are.
And this actually falls in line with what our correspondent said earlier. He said to expect, so this is totally in line with what he was saying. And then if you said all the big cities are at the bottom.
Yeah, so you've got Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, Belo Horizonte, Brasilia, they're all looking pretty green.
And business seem to, as Vinicius also just said, that businesses seem to respond favorably to Bolsonaro, which is interesting. So this map right now is not too much of a shocker.
Yeah. Maybe we could just get both of our guests to give us a sort of some final reflections on how surprised are you with the results we've seen today, and how hopeful are you that they can be overturned? Vinicius?
Right. I must say I'm lightly surprised, because I wasn't expecting Bolsonaro to have this very high voting at this moment. But at the same time, I'm also very surprised with the amount of abstention. We had in the last election a lot of null and what we call white votes. That are when people say that I don't want to vote in any candidate, but you go to vote anyway. And this time, this was not so important. We had 7% of this. Of course, I think that in the second round we are likely to have more, but the abstention is also very high. So if the candidates works in this area, with this 20%, to try to make them go and vote, go to the ballots and vote, maybe the election can be changed, because it's a completely new election now. We still have 3 weeks time, so the campaign will be on television, will be half and a half. Maybe this could be a plus to Bolsonaro. That could be an advantage for him, because he only had 8 seconds on television before. But at the same time, he's very comfortable on social media, and at this point, he will have to go more to television, he will have to go more to the radio, he will have to confront Haddad much more. So I think that we can have some positive surprise. What's really surprised me in a negative way, so to say, to the Workers' Party, is that they lost a lot of people in the parliament. They were very likely to have Dilma in the parliament for the Senate, and they didn't. And very likely to have Eduardo Suplicy in the Senate for São Paulo, and they didn't. So there will be a very conservative parliament, is likely to be. We still have to see, we still have to wait all the voting to be done and then calculate how much each party has. But to the Senate, we have clearly a more conservative Senate.
So, Anna, could I put to you the same question, essentially? How surprised are you by these results this evening? And how hopeful are you that they can be turned reversed in the second round?
We have now the confirmation that we will have a second round, and that makes us very happy and very anxious also. And we are sure that we have a lot of work to do on these next days. We really need to build a very big movement for democracy, a very big movement anti-fascism, that it is what this Bolsonaro represents. He's a fascist candidate, and that's why we need to bring everybody that we can together to say not he. And it was amazing that now when the second round was confirmed, I could hear from my window a lot of people showing not he. So there's still hope, and there's, I believe, a situation where we can really still make a very big debate on these two projects and what these two projects means mainly for the working class. On this moment, we really believe that we leave the class struggle in his kind of a highest moment in Brazil in the last years. So yes, we were kind of somehow disappointed that so many people were influenced by his messages in the last days, and he could reach 46% of the votes. But we also believe that we will have the chance now in this second round to prove that his project is a project that is against the poor people, against the workers. Is a project, a very project against all the rights that we have conquered this last 30 years in Brazil. And we really believe that there's still space to talk with all these people who are unsatisfied with politics, who are unsatisfied with all the political parties, to say that yes, there's a possibility of putting Brazil again, and the working class and the poor people could have again some winnings, and some happiness also. This is also about to be happy again, and to be a most equal country and a most democratic one. So we really are going to the streets now as landless movements, as Brazilian Popular Front, to win this battle, and to say that Haddad will be president in the 28th of October.
Thank you so much for that, Anna Chow. We ending our conversation with you on a very positive note, and we're going to switch to our correspondent, Brian Mayer. I think Brian is on the line, and we need to talk to him about these results that we're seeing. 96% of the votes are counted, so the second round is confirmed. So we are essentially looking forward to the runoff election, the head-to-head between Haddad and Bolsonaro. Brian, are you there?
Okay,
so as we're waiting, let's wait for Brian a little bit.
I think it was very interesting what Anna was saying there, because in spite of the shocking for the left results, really, they seem to be very determined that in these next 3 weeks they are going to do that job of getting out there, talking to people, mobilizing, and turning the situation around. And there is still that possibility. I think there's still that possibility that whole centre. Yeah.
I think what's interesting is that Vinicius was talking about the fact that Bolsonaro has a very digital campaign. He's very digitally savvy, which I think worked in his favor because, of course, he was stabbed early on in his campaign, so he essentially was out of it. What would be interesting now is, now that he is healthy and can go back to the campaign trail as normal, what these 2-3 weeks, is it 2 weeks or 3 weeks? 3 weeks will be like. With him on the campaign trail and Haddad on the campaign trail, what a direct head-to-head, not just in the elections, but the 3 weeks leading up, give or take, would be like, especially since you can't just depend on digital media. We're going to have to hear your comments. You're going to have to, if there are debates, you're going to have to participate. You can't call sick anymore.
Which is avoided so far, of course.
Because you can't call sick anymore. Exactly. So, are we going to see some more of his offensive statements? Or are we going to hear him speak about not wanting to rape women, or maybe and not wanting a homosexual son? What will he be like? And then too, there's the USA effect that Brian was referring to. Is Brian there?
I think we have Brian now. Yes. Hello, Brian. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Brian, we were just talking about the results. It looks like, well, it's practically confirmed that we're going to a second round. What do you make of those results?
Yeah, it is confirmed. It's mathematically impossible for Bolsonaro to win in the first round now. So it's a big relief. You know, I've been living here 23 years, and I was thinking of moving. You know, that's how bad it's going to get. So luckily, you know, Haddad ended up with like 28% of the vote. Haddad had 28%, and Ciro Gomez split the left vote with him, though. So Ciro had 12%. If you add them both together, what we're really looking at in the runoff is like 46% to 40%, a 6% difference. And so it's now up to the left, and for all Brazilians who defend democracy, right? Because if Bolsonaro is elected, it's almost the end of democracy in Brazil. So all people who defend democracy in Brazil are going to have to rally behind Fernando Haddad. Right now, it's going to be a tough fight, but I think it's possible for him to win in the second round, especially, as you said, if they have debates.
Thank you so much, Brian. We appreciate your insight on this. Unfortunately, even though I have questions for you, I can't ask you any of them because we need to finish. We need to end this show. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much for, as we dissected these really shocking results in the Brazilian elections. We are definitely going to a second round. So, of course, Tell Us Your English is going to cover that thoroughly for you. So, on behalf of myself, Soini Gray, and my co-host, Ian Bruce, thank you so much for watching.